The chamber air was thick, so dense it seemed to cling to every surface. The mahogany desks, the rows of polished nameplates, the restless bodies shifting in high-backed leather chairs. The atmosphere carried that rare weight reserved for moments everyone recognized even before a word was spoken as historic. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens poised, cameras glinting like restless eyes. The microphones scattered across the dais seemed to hum with anticipation, as though they too were waiting to capture something that would echo beyond this room. Mitt Romney leaned forward. His posture was deceptively relaxed, the kind of ease that came not from comfort, but from years of mastering the theater of politics. His gray suit caught the overhead lights with understated elegance, his expression carrying the careful polish of statesmanship. He cleared his throat, and even that simple gesture drew silence. His voice emerged steady, smooth, heavy with calculation. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his tone laced with courteous restraint. "The American people deserve more than performance. They deserve seriousness, solutions, discipline. And I must ask, with all due respect, do you believe your conduct in these hearings reflects the dignity of this institution?" The words hung in the air like smoke, polite in construction, devastating in intention. The phrasing carried no raised volume, no aggression, yet every syllable dripped with condescension, the genteel sting of a patrician voice questioning not just actions, but credibility itself. Across the chamber, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. She did not flinch, did not blink, did not give Romney the satisfaction of a defensive shuffle. Her posture was upright, her hands folded neatly on the table before her, except for the pen held lightly in her fingers. It tapped once against the wood. A sharp, solitary sound that echoed louder than expected. Reporters exchanged glances. They had seen Crockett clash with Republicans before, her fiery retorts ricocheting across social media in viral clips. But this moment felt different. Romney was no ordinary opponent. He was an institution in himself, former presidential candidate, one of the few Republicans who had broken from his party to condemn Donald Trump, a man who embodied gravitas in an era where it was in short supply. If Romney could land a clean blow against her, the headlines would write themselves. Freshman firebrand humbled by seasoned statesman, yet Crockett's eyes betrayed no flicker of fear. They were fixed, steady, sharp as glass. She drew in a single, measured breath, slow, deliberate, the inhale of someone who understood timing, who understood that silence, in the right moment, could roar louder than speech. The crowd leaned forward almost unconsciously, as if pulled toward her by magnetic force. The sound of shifting suits and rustling notepads filled the void, underscoring the suspense. Every person in the chamber, allies, critics, neutral observers, sensed that what happened next would not simply be an exchange of words. It would be a collision. A young staffer in the corner whispered, almost involuntarily, "She's about to light him up." His colleague elbowed him to silence, but the prediction hovered, vibrating with possibility. Romney tilted his chin, confident in the quiet he commanded. For decades, his voice had carried authority. In campaign rallies, in Senate hearings, in private negotiations where power shifted like sand. He was accustomed to being heard, to being heeded. But Jasmine Crockett was not leaning back. She was leaning in, her hand stilled, the pen resting against her notepad like a weapon she no longer needed to conceal. Her lips parted slightly, just enough to suggest that words carefully sharpened and ready were about to be unsheathed. The pause extended, and with it, the electricity of the moment. Cameras zoomed tighter on her face, capturing the subtle tightening of her jaw, the glint in her eyes. Romney sat back ever so slightly, his confidence undimmed but his awareness heightened. He had made the first move. The stage was his. Yet he sensed, perhaps faintly, that he had walked directly into her terrain. Crockett's inhale deepened. The silence before her voice broke. The air felt less like hesitation and more like the drumbeat before a storm. Romney adjusted the stack of papers before him, though he had no real need to. The gesture was calculated, a way of commanding rhythm, of signaling that what was about to follow was not offhand but deliberate. He lifted his gaze and let it travel across the chamber, his eyes sweeping over the rows of lawmakers, the scribbling, journalists, the cameras with their unblinking glass stares. When he finally settled back on Jasmine Crockett, he wore the faintest smile, courteous, almost paternal. "Congresswoman," he said, his tone softened by an edge of admiration. "No one doubts your passion. Your ability to command attention is remarkable. But I wonder, as many do, if passion without discipline serves the people we are all sworn to represent." His words were measured, each syllable carrying the weight of statesmanship. This was Romney at his most polished, not the firebrand nor the partisan warrior, but the patrician senator wielding the scalpel rather than the hammer. He paused, just long enough for the subtle sting to register, then leaned in further. Time and again we've seen exchanges that go viral on social media. Clips that gather millions of views, that excite audiences. But is that our duty here? Are we meant to produce theater? Or are we here to build legislation that will endure? Dignity, restraint, and civility. These are not decorations, Congresswoman. They are the foundations of democracy itself. The murmur in the room rose, a low tide of shifting bodies and half-suppressed reactions. Some nodded in approval, charmed by the elegance of Romney's critique. Others stiffened, sensing the condescension beneath the velvet phrasing. Crockett sat unmoving, her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, her pen still resting between her fingers. She listened, as though cataloging each word, filing them carefully, into invisible drawers where they would later be retrieved and sharpened into weapons. Romney pressed forward, his cadence steady, his confidence building. "You see, Congresswoman, institutions survive not because individuals shout the loudest, but because they uphold the dignity of their office. You may capture headlines, but headlines do not pass bills. And when future generations look back, they will not remember who raised their voice the highest. They will remember who delivered results." The sting was unmistakable now. It was not simply a critique of her style, it was an indictment of her substance. Romney was painting her not as a rising star but as a distraction, a sparkler that dazzled briefly before burning out. Gasps rippled from a section of the audience. A staffer scribbled furiously in the margin of his notebook. One reporter whispered, "He's going for her record now." Romney, sensing his advantage, let his voice lower, more intimate, almost confessional. "I do not question your sincerity nor your commitment, but sincerity without restraint has undone many before you. A legislator must temper fire with wisdom. You have the first, but I ask you plainly, where is the second?" Silence followed, deep and reverberating. Crockett lifted her chin slightly, her expression still unreadable. She did not rush to answer, and that choice alone unsettled the rhythm Romney had worked so carefully to construct. The cameras shifted, zooming in, recording every flicker of tension. Somewhere in the gallery, someone stifled a cough. The gavel rested on the desk like an unused threat. Crockett finally moved. She placed her pen down with deliberate care, the small click against the wood loud in the cavernous room. She folded, her hands, her gaze never leaving Romney. Her voice, when it came, was low and calm, but edged with something sharp enough to slice through his crafted courtesy. "You've had decades in these halls, Senator. Decades to build your legacy, to test your fire against the winds of this institution. And yet here you sit, questioning not my sincerity but my method." Romney's brow furrowed slightly, though his lips remained in that same half-smile. Crockett continued, her tone gathering momentum. "You speak of dignity as though it belongs only to those who speak softly. But dignity, Senator, is not a performance. It is truth spoken without fear, even when the room bristles, even when power itself feels threatened." The words struck with precision, turning his critique back on him without so much as a raised voice. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, sharper now, less restrained. Romney sat back, his confidence unshaken, but the faintest flicker passed across his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, that she was not walking into his trap. She was sidestepping it entirely. The silence between them thickened, a taut rope strung between two very different visions of politics, one rooted in decorum, the other in disruption. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the rope to snap. Crockett tapped her pen once more, as if signaling the room itself. The rhythm was steady, unhurried, a reminder that she was not reacting. She was preparing. And for the first time, Romney sensed the floor beneath him shift ever so slightly. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable, as if the entire chamber was suspended between two versions of reality. On one side, Mitt Romney embodied the practiced confidence of a man who believed institutions were sacred, their traditions indispensable. On the other, Jasmine Crockett represented something rawer, hungrier, unwilling to bow before structures that had long ignored or dismissed voices like hers. Romney broke the pause first, his voice regaining its composure, cool and deliberate. "Congresswoman, we are not enemies. We serve the same people, in the same democracy. But the difference between us is that I still believe this institution can rise above partisanship. I believe that respect and restraint can restore what has been lost. What you call disruption, I call destruction. What you call truth, I fear may be spectacle." His words carried the gravitas of experience, the practiced rhetoric of a statesman who had built his career on ideals of moderation and institutional order. Some heads in the chamber nodded. There was comfort in his vision, a nostalgia for civility, a yearning for politics as a steady hand rather than a clenched fist. But Crockett leaned forward, her eyes fixed on him, her tone cutting with quiet intensity. "You believe in an institution that has rarely believed in me, or in the people I represent. Respect and restraint have always been demanded of us, Senator, but rarely of those who sit in power. I raise my voice because when we whisper, no one listens. I disrupt because silence has never saved us." The chamber stirred, murmurs swelling into a tide. Crockett's words carried not only the sting of rebuttal, but the weight of lived experience. She invoked centuries of struggle with a single breath, calling forth the echoes of voices silenced in the name of decorum. Romney straightened, his jaw tightening as he absorbed her strike. "And yet, Congresswoman, without decorum, without rules, without restraint, what separates us from chaos? The law itself depends on institutions. Tear them down, and you will find nothing left to protect the people you claim to fight for." Crockett's pen tapped once against the wood again, but this time it was no idle gesture. It was punctuation, deliberate and sharp. Her voice rose slightly, clear enough to cut through every murmur. "Senator, the chaos you fear has never been our doing. It is written in history. The laws that upheld segregation, the policies that excluded women, the decisions that put profit over people. Those were not the products of raised voices. Those were the products of silence, rubber stamps, and civility weaponized against justice." A hush swept through the room. Even those aligned with Romney's vision could not dismiss the moral edge of her words. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the fire in her eyes, the tightening of her fists, the steadiness of her tone. She pressed further, her voice gathering rhythm. "You tell me to be quiet, to trust the process, to wait my turn. But waiting has always meant watching others suffer. Respect without truth is complicity. Restraint without justice is cowardice. And civility, when demanded only of the marginalized, is not civility at all. It is control." Her words crashed over the chamber like waves against stone. For a moment Romney looked smaller, not because his stature had diminished, but because Crockett's presence had expanded, filling every corner of the room with unflinching conviction. Reporters scribbled furiously. A headline was already writing itself in their notes. "Crockett confronts Romney on double standards of power." Romney tried to steady himself, lifting his chin, summoning the calm authority of decades in public life. "Congresswoman, history will judge us all, and it will not be kind to those who let passion override principle." Crockett's reply came without hesitation, her voice low but ringing with certainty. "History will not judge me for being too loud. It will judge me, and you, for whether we chose comfort over justice. And I refuse to be remembered as someone who stayed silent to keep the peace of men already comfortable." The chamber erupted, not in chaos, but in a collective recognition that something seismic had occurred. Applause broke from the gallery, quickly silenced by the gavel's pounding. But the echo lingered like thunder rolling beyond the walls. Romney's lips pressed into a tight line, his composure intact, but his advantage shaken. He had tried to cast Crockett as reckless, unrefined, unfit for the institution. Instead, she had reframed the entire debate, elevating her disruption into a moral necessity. In that moment, the ideological rift stood fully exposed. Romney clinging to the stability of tradition, Crockett demanding transformation born of truth. The two visions could not be reconciled. The chamber felt it. The country watching would feel it. And both of them knew the battle had only just begun. Crockett picked up her pen once more, her eyes unblinking, her silence more commanding than Romney's carefully crafted words. The storm had begun and there would be no returning to calm waters. Romney adjusted his tie with a faint tug, a gesture more for composure than necessity. He knew Crockett's last words had landed with devastating weight. The murmurs still lingered, whispers circling through the chamber like restless sparks. If he let the moment stand, she would own the narrative completely. And Mitt Romney, veteran of presidential campaigns, architect of countless debates, knew the one way to counter passion was with precision, numbers, facts, and the cold language of results. His voice carried a new edge, quieter, sharper. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, "I admire your conviction, but I must remind you and everyone here, conviction is not legislation. Passion does not pave roads, or balance budgets, or reform healthcare systems. Only bills passed into law do that." He leaned forward, drawing the microphone slightly closer. "In your time here, how many bills have you authored that became law? How many bipartisan coalitions have you built strong enough to withstand the storm you summon with your rhetoric?" A few gasps darted across the room. It was a brutal, surgical strike. Numbers, after all, did not carry the warmth of morality. They carried the weight of proof, or the absence of it. Reporters scribbled with renewed intensity. One whispered, "He's attacking her productivity now." Another nodded, already thinking in headlines. "Romney questions Crockett's record." Romney pressed the point, his cadence deliberate. "We cannot build a nation on sound bites, Congresswoman. We cannot legislate by clip, by viral moment, by trending hashtag. The people of Texas, the people of this nation, they deserve results, not applause lines. And with all respect, I fear you have confused one for the other." The words hit like stones, cloaked in courtesy but heavy with accusation. He was no longer challenging her tone or civility. He was going after her legitimacy, the very foundation of her work. Crockett did not immediately respond. She lifted her pen again, tapping it once, then twice, as though syncing herself with the pulse of the room. Her eyes flicked briefly, toward the reporter scribbling in the gallery, then back to Romney. The silence between them stretched, and the room grew taut with anticipation. Romney tilted his chin, sensing advantage. For a fleeting moment, he believed he had regained control. He was pulling the debate into his domain. Measurable outcomes, trackable progress, the ledger of government. Crockett's fire would burn, yes, but it could be extinguished by the numbers he wielded like a shield. Then Crockett spoke. Her tone was calm, but beneath it lay a current of rising power. "Senator, I will not deny the arithmetic. You've been here longer than I've been alive, and your record is measured in volumes. But let me ask you something in return. How many of those laws you've passed were born from the cries of people who had no microphone, no power, no voice?" Romney blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in ground. She continued, her voice steady, deliberate. "You measure progress in bills signed. I measure it in lives touched. You ask for numbers. I bring you stories. Families who watched hearings like this and felt, for the first time, that someone was fighting for them. Mothers who saw their children's struggles spoken aloud. Workers who watched corporations squirm under scrutiny. That is accountability, Senator. Visibility is its own kind of legislation." The chamber stirred again, Louder now, the murmurs swelling into something restless. A young reporter mouthed the words, "Visibility is accountability." Already knowing it would be tomorrow's headline, Romney straightened, trying to press the blade once more. "But Congresswoman, stories without laws are just noise. You cannot govern on emotion. You cannot feed families with rhetoric." Crockett leaned forward, her eyes unyielding. "And you cannot feed them with statistics stripped of humanity. You call it noise. I call it a wake-up call. Because without it, there is no pressure to act. Without pressure, there is no progress. History does not remember the bills that died quietly in committee. It remembers the moments when someone dared to break silence. Applause cracked from the gallery before the gavel slammed down. The sound lingered despite the calls for order, defiant, like an echo refusing to fade. Romney's jaw tightened, his composure unbroken, but his rhythm disrupted. He had expected her to stumble against the weight of his ledger. Instead, she had shifted the ground entirely, redefining effectiveness not in terms of paper and ink but in the resonance of voice. The ideological rift was widening, no longer just about tone or tradition, but about what politics itself meant, a battle between metrics and meaning, between institutions and movements. Crockett's pen tapped once more, softer this time but with a cadence that suggested inevitability. She was not done. The storm was only gathering force. The lights above flickered faintly, a reminder of the stale air and the mounting pressure in the chamber. Mitt Romney leaned forward, the faint gleam of his cufflinks catching the camera's eye. He carried himself with the controlled gravity of a man who had built an entire career on steadiness. But beneath that polished restraint lay strategy, sharpened and precise. He began softly, his voice calm enough to disarm. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, almost with the patience of a teacher. "You speak passionately of justice, but passion alone does not equate to evidence. Do you truly believe anger is a substitute for proof?" The question wasn't a mere inquiry. It was a snare. The crowd murmured, sensing the weight of his words. Crockett didn't move at first. Her pen hovered above her notes, ink threatening to blot the page. The silence stretched long enough to register on every camera, long enough to give Romney the appearance of dominance. Romney capitalized. His voice grew firmer, tinged with the polished cadence of years at the Senate floor. "We are not here to wage ideological battles. We are here for truth. And if you claim systemic corruption, then present something more than rhetoric. Where are your facts? Where is your evidence?" The word evidence struck like a gavel. He repeated it, slow, deliberate, knowing that repetition would echo across evening broadcasts. A low hum rippled through the audience. Some nodded with him, others stiffened with quiet resistance. Jasmine finally looked up, her eyes steady but her jaw tight. The heat in her chest did not show in her voice, not yet. Instead, she let Romney's challenge settle into the air like smoke drifting toward an open flame. "You speak of truth," she said, her tone measured, her voice lower than before. "But truth doesn't live in the polished halls you've grown so comfortable in. It lives in the stories of the people who have no microphone, the ones who are silenced before they ever reach this chamber." Romney lifted a brow, amused almost, and pressed harder. "Stories," he repeated. "Stories do not win cases, Congresswoman. Stories do not convict. Stories do not prove." His voice rose slightly, enough to command authority without seeming harsh. "Do you truly expect this body to act on what amounts to sentiment?" Gasps moved through the room. Crockett's supporters bristled, some shifting forward as though ready to leap in her defense. Others whispered, sensing the drama building. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens chasing the friction between two very different definitions of justice. Romney sat back, deliberately crossing one leg over the other, signaling confidence, even impatience. "This is your moment, Congresswoman," he said smoothly. "Prove that you are more than passion, or accept that in matters of law, sentiment has no standing." The silence that followed was thick enough to smother. Cameras zoomed in on Crockett's face, the faintest flicker of fire behind her eyes. Her knuckles pressed into the table, whitening, as though holding back the first wave of a storm not yet released. And then, the faintest smile ghosted across her lips. The crowd could not hear her thoughts, but they could feel it. Jasmine Crockett was about to answer. The committee chamber no longer resembled a sterile government space. It had transformed into an arena. Every microphone became a weapon, every camera and eye waiting to magnify the smallest falter. The crossfire had begun, and at its center, Mitt Romney and Jasmine Crockett sat locked in an unspoken duel. Romney adjusted his tie, the movement deliberate, signaling a composure honed over decades in the Senate. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice pitched for civility, but beneath it ran an undertow of dismissal. "You've made impassioned claims, but passion isn't proof. Can you show us here and now anything beyond rhetoric?" The words lingered in the air, dressed in politeness, but cutting like a blade. Cameras zoomed in, capturing Crockett's face, searching for even the faintest flicker of doubt. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her posture deceptively relaxed, though her fingers tightened around her pen. "Senator, you ask for proof as though this room hasn't been drowning in it for years. Proof isn't the problem. The problem is the willful blindness to see what's in front of us." A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience. Some reporters scribbled furiously, others froze, eyes darting between the two figures like spectators at a prize fight. Romney's smile was a thin veneer. "You accuse blindness, but perhaps it's you who refuses perspective. Progress requires pragmatism, not just fire." Jasmine tilted forward, her eyes sharp as glass. "Pragmatism is too often the shield of those unwilling to disrupt the comfort of power. What you call pragmatism, Senator, many outside these walls call surrender." The silence that followed was heavier than before, as though the walls themselves absorbed her words. Romney's jaw tightened. He was not used to being challenged so directly, certainly not with the precision of someone who wielded language like a blade sharpened for this very stage. He tried to parry. "Then tell me, Congresswoman, what does your brand of disruption accomplish? Division? Chaos? A politics of spectacle?" Her pen stopped tapping. She placed it carefully on the table, the gesture signaling she was now fully engaged, both hands free. "What it accomplishes, Senator, is a refusal to be complicit. Disruption isn't chaos when the system itself is already fractured. Division isn't created by those demanding justice. It's exposed by them. Don't mistake exposure for destruction." The chamber exhaled in unison, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Even those aligned with Romney felt the sting of her framing. It was no longer a question of pragmatism versus passion. It had become a battle over who defined the moral center of the room. Romney leaned back, crossing his arms, a gesture of restraint but also defensiveness. "Strong words, Congresswoman. Yet I wonder, do you believe your approach wins hearts, or only headlines?" Crockett's gaze did not waver. "I believe truth wins hearts, even if it wounds them first. And if headlines carry that truth beyond these marble walls, then so be it. Better the world hear uncomfortable honesty than polished silence." For a moment, the senator had no reply. His silence was strategic. But in that silence, Crockett's words filled the chamber like a tide rising too quickly to ignore. From the gallery, a voice whispered, "She's turning it around." Another answered, "Romney looks cornered." The energy shifted, no longer evenly balanced. It tilted toward the Congresswoman, whose rhythm grew stronger with each exchange. Romney finally spoke, his voice clipped but still coated in statesmanlike decorum. "Congresswoman Crockett, history judges those who confuse indignation for leadership. I caution you, storms burn out faster than the steady march of governance." Jasmine let the weight of his words settle, then delivered her own with a calmness that sliced deeper than anger. "And I caution you, Senator, that governance without courage is nothing but maintenance of the unacceptable. History doesn't remember those who kept things tidy. It remembers those who dared." A shiver ran through the chamber. Romney blinked, his composure cracking just enough for the cameras to capture it. A fleeting but undeniable fracture. The crossfire had left scorch marks on both sides, but one truth was clear. Crockett wasn't merely surviving this battle, she was beginning to bend it to her advantage. The duel was no longer between experience and youth, pragmatism and passion. It had become a referendum on whose definition of leadership would echo beyond the walls of this chamber. And in the silence that followed, the world leaned closer, waiting to see whose fire would last the longest.